Welcome to the Cardboard Herald Podcast. I am Eric, joined as always by my lovely co-host Jack. No adjective this week. No adjective
list.
Just lovely.
Just like sometimes the X-Men.
Okay, exactly. That's a reference.
Yeah,
I get it.
You got uncanny, you got extreme, but within the fandom, the community, when they were like, no dog, this is just X-Men, then the community would call that the adjective-less X-Men.
See, I learn something new every day. I comics are a side of being a nerd that I just never got around to, and there was a time I, as a kid, remember my dad had like an encyclopedia of Batman. It was just like all of the different things like that were in Batman, all of the different characters, and I read through that like frequently. That was a constant frame of reference that I used, and never read a Batman comic, just the encyclopedia, which feels more nerdy.
Being a little bit older than you, like there wasn't a pervasive mainstream drip of these flamboyant and exciting characters that are really attractive to kids who, want to see these superheroes duke it out and everything. So I couldn't just go to the movies or, have that exposed to me just as part of mainstream culture. And I had to get that either through comic books or through cartoons and that kind of stuff. And the other thing is that I grew up in Alaska where we had this very prominent comic shop, Bosco's Cards, Comics, and Games. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized that those things tend to be separate in the rest of the United States. Like you had a sports card store, and then you might have a comic shop, and then you might have a game shop. And there is a little bit of cross-pollination in between all of those. But because those individual niches weren't enough of a market to really stand on their own, Bosco's in Anchorage and Eagle River, which was one of my first jobs working at Bosco's in Eagle River, kind of cornered whatever niche nerd market it could. When anime was a big thing, they had tons of anime. They had models. They had fantasy books, like the first time I encountered Game of Thrones as a paperback novel was at Bosco's, but they also had comics, Magic cards, Legend of the Five Rings, Catan. They had all that stuff. So like, because of where I grew up, gaming as well as sports cards and comics were all kind of part of the same, well, I guess I'm a dork and this is where I go now culture. Some crazy things are happening with the lighting on your screen.
Yeah, I realized that my camera was wildly underexposed, and so I was changing it. And
I was worried you were getting raptured. I mean, we're getting close to Easter, so I didn't know exactly what was happening.
And that's fair, and you should be constantly worried about me in particular being raptured.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
So what you been playing, adjective-less, Eric?
No, I have adjectives. You're the one without adjectives.
Okay.
I
Secret
got
adjectives.
my hands on recently two games that were just announced today that we are doing a review on, which is Gingham and Gazebo, both from Bitewing Games. They're just two super.
I'm sorry.
portable.
Did you just say gazebo?
Gazebo.
Is it gazebo? Okay. All right.
Gazebo.
I'm going to allow it. Let's go on. What's Bitewing got in store for us?
So
is this a hegemony situation? No. Let's let it ride.
It's certainly pronounced gazebo, but I just find the fact that gazebo is fun. Gazebo is more fun to say, and therefore I'm going to say it in a similar way to zebra.
Okay. Okay.
And I think I'm going to have a skit at the beginning of our review, which is generally a good sign for games. Generally, if you or I put a skit in the front of a review, it means that we have liked the game enough to come up with a silly little skit for it. And that's been true so far. Gazebo and Gingham are two lighter weight games that are, I think the big thing is they're hyper portable. kind of feels like the big marketing technique with them. They have like little cases that you have a carabiner that you can strap on, and they all fit in a very portable container. Their maps are cloth maps, but both of them are just really simple rule, complex strategy, I think is kind of the best way of putting it, where there's it's both of them have a lot of, when you're starting out you don't know what the best move is, but after you've played a couple times they feel very like, oh, you can be really smart. Like, this game lets you be really smart, and if you pull off a really cool move, you can win off of that one really cool move if you can get it to a line right. Gingham is a tile layer. It's ants that are the tiles, but you place them around trying to connect different suites together in orthogonal connections, and you score points based on how long the distance is between the two stacks via your ants, and then also a like almost area control, where you're trying to control the stacks that you create to make them the biggest possible stack that you're in control of. And it has a really interesting action selection, or sorry, not, there is also an action selection, but turn order selection mechanic where
they're both visually really striking.
Yeah.
And there's with the ant game, that's Gingham.
That's Gingham.
You said there's a turn order selection thing. Is that what's going on with this like brown chocolate bar?
So that is a action selection that is, you can get bonus actions through that, where it just lets you do things that you normally wouldn't be able to do, which is either like placing in the same row as yourself or an opponent, placing across the stitch, which on the map it's like an 8x8 grid for single or 2-player, and a 10x10 grid for 3 or 4-player, and there's just a line drawn diagonally through the middle, and you can only play on the half of the board that you start playing on. And so for that, it's like there are two sides of the board and there's a diagonal in the middle. If you choose closer to where there's like fewer spaces, you'll go sooner in the next round. So if you give yourself fewer options this turn by playing really close to one of the edges of the stitch, you'll be able to take your turn sooner next time around, which leads to like really interesting choices that you have to make. I don't know. I've been loving that one. That's the one that I've played more of. Gazebo is also tile laying with like domino style pieces where you're trying to connect larger and larger areas. That one is definitely more area control and less like an orthogonal puzzle type thing. That one is designed by Reiner Knizia.
Yeah, how the tiles look and the fact that you're describing it as area control, I wonder if it's almost got some resonance of Tigris and Euphrates. Certainly has the pedigree and the tile laying look to it. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And we're going to have Nick Murray as a guest, or rather you're going to have him on as a guest here soon. Nick Murray is the owner of Bitewing. And while you were going to talk to him kind of about the logistics of managing Kickstarters amid the turmoil, might be worth just asking him about the continued relationship with Reiner Knizia, because I'm still fascinated that he's managed this kind of lock-in with such a well-known and respected designer in the biz, though I guess Knizia puts out like 17 games a week, so he's working with all kinds of people, but a lot of his new stuff seems to be coming out in the US through Bitewing, so it's an interesting relationship for sure.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that it's it's going to be a good chat, and I think that people should start sending in questions in the comments or via emails. Or we'll probably put a post up here at some point or another. That's coming in like a couple weeks. We'll sit down and chat with him. Probably just me, but it'll be. I think it'll be interesting, especially with playing these games more. I get a lot of questions of. I think with Kickstarter. In my mind, when I think of a Kickstarter game, I'm thinking of like these huge big box games that have hundreds of add-ons. And here it feels like the Kickstarter component of it is you're getting this really cool, smaller and smaller box game. So it starts out, the box that they send it in, and I actually need to double check the email that Nick sent us, but the box they send us in is just like a standard game box that's like vaguely a Harmonies sized box. And then you open that box, and within that box is the carrying case that's just smaller. And I think I remember some part of what I have, I believe, is a deluxe component. I don't know which part. I'm going to review that when I start putting my review together. But
they did that for Trails.
Yeah.
Trails had one of those like zipper carabiner outfits as well. But Trails was a much larger box that had that smaller carrying component in it, which, I think when I reviewed Trails, I mentioned I don't imagine bringing this to any breezy campsite where cards are just going to go haywire. But hey, more power to you. Maybe you don't live in Southeast Alaska and it's less of a concern on your beautiful picnic.
But yeah, those have mainly been the games I'm playing. I've had a bit of a hectic week, so I haven't necessarily had a ton of time to sit down too thoroughly and play through some games. Though I have a couple game nights coming up. What have you gotten into, Jack?
Oh, man. I've been doing a lot of good gaming. I think that I've talked about doing the Sleeping Gods, Distant Skies. I wanted to give just a quick shout out to that Red Raven Games, I think, has come out with their best game in Distant Skies. It's a better focused system than the original Sleeping Gods. It's very similar, but it just refines everything. Though the campaign is very short, it's an open world game. So, like, we just came off of this monstrous 2-year-long, over 100-session Frosthaven campaign, and then we finished Sleeping Gods, like, one playthrough in 3 sessions, and we're like, wait, I guess that's that. But it left so much content on the table, and it has this brilliant achievement system where you can unlock additional components or things that kind of allow you to give like a new game plus run through, where it may change some levers. If you're not familiar with the game, a lot of how it works is when you open the storybook, it'll ask if you have, say you go to a town and it'll be like, do you have keyword gambler? If you have keyword gambler, then go to this other path. But otherwise, here's the standard things that you do in the town. Maybe you get gambler within context of the town, or maybe it's something completely different. And there's hundreds of these keywords. And the levers that the game pulls, both within the context of one game and future campaigns, is really cool. So instead of shifting gears to play something else, we decided to start a new campaign of that and specifically look for the totems, which are the MacGuffins of the game, but also like gameplay affecting items that you can find. We now have an achievement list of all the totems that you could get, and we're like, well, let's just go to places we didn't go, look for a different ending, look for different totems, look for different characters, and see if we can find all this different stuff. And it seems like the game really supports that. There's been a little bit of repeated content, but it's cool that we're able to go in a different direction and still have a lot of fun with it. So really enjoying that. But new to me that I haven't played, I got Deep Regrets in, which is the top of the board game Geek hotness.
Yeah, the photo. Jack sent a photo of like that game and a few others that all came on the same day, and that poor mailman or a male person had to carry like 8 games to Jack in Alaska through the snow. I have no clue. I'm guessing
exactly.
It wasn't snowing.
No snow
Uphill
here.
both
Snow in
ways.
Anchorage. So, I guess joke's on them in Anchorage. But, Deep Regrets, I've only played the solo mode so far, but it is really cool. It's the solo mode isn't really an approximation of the standard game, which is something that I would find off-putting. But it's so interesting and evocative of what I think the direct comparison that a lot of people do is to the video game Dredge, where you're doing a survey of the ocean and you have this enormous chart that's dedicated just for solo mode, and the box has a ton of these on a pad. But you are trying to catch and successfully bring in one of each fish, and I think there's over 100 fish that you can get, and catalog them, and you have to write them down and everything. But there's things that could affect whether you go back to port or not. And at the end of each game, unlike the standard game where you can go back to port, sell fish, it's part of the game loop to get additional equipment, here you have just a set number of days to catch as many fish as you can with the loadout that you start that game with. And then at the end of the game, you trade in any of your fish, and then you can use money to buy equipment that will be available as part of a campaign, so you can continue to invest in your capabilities and hopefully catch additional fish, or mitigate your luck, or I guess scry through decks, or do whatever you need to be able to eventually complete the campaign. There's no real loss condition, which is something that I would normally find upsetting, but as disturbing as some of these fish are and the setting is, it's an extremely cozy game. So the idea of like, well, this was today's catch, here's what I was able to successfully bring in, and I don't know, I'll upgrade my rod and maybe make it so I have another dice that's available to me on all future games, and then we'll see what I can do next time and fill out my chart. It's cool. It's really enjoyable, and something completely unlike anything that I've done as solo, and contrary to what I normally look for in a solo game. As a multiplayer game, the rules look great. I'm hoping to play it this week, including tomorrow at Devil's Club, because that seems like a perfect setting to be in a port town, at a bar, or a brewery, I should say, and playing a game all about going psychopathic, being married to the sea. And then other than that, playing an oldie but a goodie, I got Aeon's End, which I've been looking for cooperative games. Also played solo. My family's been really busy. My game group's been really busy. So we haven't dived into a bunch of other stuff. But Aeon's End, played that a couple times solo, and it's pretty good. It's one of those cooperative games that I never got to the table. When it came out, I was kind of on deck building game overload. It does some really smart things that I think are novel. Even to date, I haven't really seen a lot of spin on it. The fact that your deck doesn't shuffle, it just flops back over. So you have a degree of manipulation that you can do to your deck with the foresight that you're just going to flop the deck over. Has some interesting implications. And the fact that it's kind of this cooperative boss battler. I guess the original first edition didn't have a true solo mode baked in. The second edition does, which is cool. I only played with one character, but I enjoyed the system. It has some component stuff that still feels a little long in the tooth or of a time. I think the game is from 2016, so it's definitely getting up there in age, but I think it holds up. Honestly, I was looking for something that gave me tastes of the sense that you get in Spirit Island, because Spirit Island, the best thing is you have the different spirits, and then you kind of cultivate your powers and work in conjunction with, the current game state, what you're able to get your hands on, and how do you grow in such a way that you can tackle this obstacle.
Yeah.
And, Aeon's End doesn't necessarily do that to, like, the extreme degree that Spirit Island does, but it still has those faint notes. So I'm digging it.
Brad, I mean, I think that, I was interested in Aeon's End. I got it on Steam a bit ago, and I played the tutorial, and then I think that was like right when I moved. I think I got it right when I moved up to Juneau, or like right before I moved up to Juneau, and I just didn't unbox. Like, I didn't get my computer plugged in for like 4 or 5 months, and I just wasn't gaming on my computer. So that was a time period. So maybe this is a sign for me to crack it back open and see what Aeon's End has to hold and make my own opinions, form them.
Yeah.
And just see, was the money I spent on getting Aeon's End through the Humble Bundle a good value?
Right.
Was it a good value, Jack, do you think, when you bought it?
Well, I had to think about that because this is a game that I didn't get as a review copy, and I spent my own money on it, just like Deep Regrets. And those are two different examples of where one was a Kickstarter that I originally was like, would this be something that is worth me investing my time and money in? And then the other was a retail purchase because it was my birthday recently and I had some birthday money and wanted to go over to Alaska Robotics to buy a game.
Yeah.
And those are important questions you got to ask yourself sometimes. It's almost worth talking about.
This week's topic, theme. I'm getting so good at these transitions, Jack. I'm getting so good at these transitions. I put forth this podcast consideration, or this podcast topic consideration of how do we value games. And I think for me, one of the reasons I thought about this was with the tariffs, which we talked about in last week's episode, and just some other things happening with me and my situation. I think it's interesting to think about how we value games. And I think that we can kind of approach this in a few different ways, which would be one, coming at it kind of in the mind of a publisher, which is how do you determine how much a game should cost? Because in theory, it is based on components, and that's like a big thought of it. But then, there's obviously a lot of things that go into the publishing of the game that aren't represented in the components. Like, it might have a really long development time, or maybe this is like from a designer that is like really hot, and you think that it would be really good to charge more because you think you can cash in on the fact that this publisher has a big following, or a designer has a big following. So I was thinking about that as one way to approach the topic of how do you value games. Two, being as a consumer, what makes you think whether or not a game is worth it? And how do you value it from that perspective? And then finally, and I think this kind of goes back to a topic that we frequently come back to, because I think especially in board games, it's a topic that is easy to loop into most conversations, which is, I already own the games. How do I value them? Like, how do I go about making like a top 10 ranking, or not necessarily a top 10 ranking, but how do I choose like, this is the game I want to keep for XYZ reason? So I think from the first standpoint, obviously, as a publisher, components are a huge factor in how a game is priced, right? Like,
absolutely,
the physical cost of it. But then, how much do you think is like, with it's a,
you can tell we did our research.
We did our research. For this one. We did our research really great here. I guess the thought that I have is it must be really tough as a publisher to know like how much you think people are going to pay for games. And this is probably something I'll talk to Nick from Bitewing about.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think there's a lot of considerations that go into this. The classic example of just the sort of mental gymnastics that go into marketing a game, because that's really what we're talking about here, is Splendor, for example, because Splendor is a game that has what you might consider a medium or medium small sized box, but it's a full game board game box. But it would fit easily within something that's like, I don't know, 4 decks of cards stacked on top of each other. However, if you want to sell Splendor as a $39.99 game, it cannot be something that is tiny, the size of Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs. Like, that just does not work to have that sell as a $40 game.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. When you were doing like this, your phone read it as a heart, and it did a heart emoji. It's doing
I see it. I see it. I love it.
I am so sorry to interrupt.
No, that totally works. This is the curse that I put myself into by having Apple. So, yeah, Splendor is that example of what perceived value is to the consumer versus what the bottom line value has to be to the company. And I honestly don't know anything about the manufacturing cost of getting Splendor made relative to other games. I've heard certain things about some components are cheaper to manufacture than others when it comes to the like how much of a markup you can have. So like card-based games tend to have greater profit margins than games that have a lot of more substantive components. But yeah, I think that's some of the hurdle, the psychological hurdle that publishers have to get over is us as consumers. We want to feel like if I'm paying a bunch for something, that something is a possession that I can actually hold on to. The perceived value is about the physical product and not about the entertainment product involved in it, right? Because as an entertainment medium, board games are huge bang for your buck compared to going to the movie theater, maybe going skiing or something, a ski pass to a resort. Like, low barrier to entry, high yield, especially if you're going to be playing a game and again and again and again and again. I mean, I've played my copy of Splendor like 60 times at least.
Yeah.
Why would I balk at the idea of Splendor costing $40, even if it was really small? So, I don't know. I'm sure that this is something that, people like are, I don't know, Stephen Bonacore has probably talked about this endlessly, or Jamie Stegmaier has probably gotten into this, the marketing decisions that are involved. I know you have aspirations of game design and publishing. Have you ever, when designing a game, thought about components from the standpoint of what's going to be reasonable to pitch to a company to be attractive for them to produce, and like what sorts of MSRP they might consider making this game? Like, is that ever a consideration in your mind?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've definitely, when I have been in the works on a game, started trying to figure out what the actual end product is going to look like, and then made some decisions of, okay, well, do I want this to be a functional piece? And if so, why does it need to be? or could I replace it with something else that would be either already a thing that is in the game, or just a thing that would be cheaper to manufacture. And I think that it definitely I keep in my mind, because at the same time, in theory, if you're trying to get a game published, you would like it to be very cheap to make, because that just gives you a wider range of people who would be willing to take on that project. So I think as a game designer, it's in the back of my mind. I, of course, have not published a game, so I can't say, like, I know anything past just I have read a ton about game design, and I have designed some games that have been just in my home, and that have gotten a lot of hours of play, but aren't, I haven't chatted with a publisher about any of them. But I have thought about it where I'm, like, putting together a game, and I think, I am going to try to, let me see if I can make this more about the cards that you're playing with, because I also, like, know that cards are a very cheap thing to manufacture a ton of.
And I think the games industry is very unique in how they do some of this value setting, because there's a huge section of this industry that's passion driven, where people who play games and maybe have no aspirations of making money making games will go through a colossal amount of effort to see something that they've created be within the hobby. So, like, you might have people who are game designers or even game publishers where that's just kind of a side thing to break even, but they're just very proud and happy to invest their time in it. Whereas the value proposition has to be really different if you are a company paying for employees, making sure that you have competitive wages, you're paying royalties for games that you've signed, and you have to sell a number of units to be able to keep up overhead, maybe for a brick and mortar business, to travel to conventions, to do all kinds of things. So there is already this difference in the market, especially because of crowdfunding, where there's a lot of single run games, or maybe only run a few times, but essentially run as pre-orders with all the money coming in up front. And you don't have to do that guesswork about, am I going to sell as many units in order to make an appropriate profit off of this, and how many do I order so that way I have available stock, but not so many that I am just stuck with 10,000 copies of, I don't know, Belfast or something. And that's got to be a really tricky thing. So the decisions that are getting made by these small passion-driven creatives, like if you were trying to publish a game yourself, would be very different than, I think, what someone like AEG or GMT or Stonemaier or any of these other companies, Leader Games, who is known for having a large workforce for this industry, and trying to make sure that they're paying all their employees fair wages and keeping them happy as individuals who want to work for that company. It's there's a lot of logistics that are involved in it, for sure.
Moving on to just, like, we are seeing a game on the shelf, and we see a price tag. How do we, as consumers, come to the decision of whether or not that is a good value? And I think there's...
Well, but before you get into your thoughts on this, can I drop some Cardboard Herald lore on you?
Yeah, let's drop the lore.
Okay, let's go to the lore corner. Dude. So here in the lore corner, it was a very conscious decision, and this may come across as very hoity-toity or pretentious, but when I started the Cardboard Herald, I was very adamant that I did not want to make purchasing decisions for other people. Yes, reviews inherently are going to influence whether people want to get a game or not, but I wanted to be a little detached from that. And part of that was I don't give scores. Like I could have done, all right, I give this a 4 out of 5, or, like whatever. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want any sort of inherent, well, if it's a 5 out of 5, that means I better buy it. And I always wanted to kind of equivocate all my answers to be in a subjective realm. This is me saying why I like a game or think it has value or there's interesting things to say about it, even if I don't like a game. And so it has always been from the perspective of analysis. And part of that is, one, a lot of movie reviews that I really love, or other forms of criticism had a huge influence on this as a hobby for me. The Cardboard Herald as a hobby. And the other thing was, like, I don't know. Money's tough, man. I don't know what's worth it to you. Like, what gaming does for you. I don't paint minis. So, like, is me saying you should get a game, even though you might get a lot of entertainment value out of the minis and painting them versus, something else where I think that there's a lot of creative replayability. I don't know. So purchasing decisions were something that we consciously steered away from. So this discussion comes with the caveat, probably the doesn't need to be said caveat of you do you, audience.
Yeah.
You think about what you think about, but here we can talk about, like, what matters to us, like how we evaluate and how we judge this. So with that, we'll come back from the corner. And Eric,
out of the lore corner.
How do you,
we're out of sepia tone because I've made that decision in my head that the lore corner is going to be in sepia tone. We're now back to full color, baby.
Old man Eddie is done talking about, like, back in 1873.
And you probably should have told me, because I frequently in my reviews be like, I would maybe suggest you purchase this if this is your situation. I've said that. I have already gone against the old teachings, the old way.
Yeah, I could have pushed back against that, but, like, it was, it's fine. It's fine. We're out of the lore corner now. We're
out of the lore corner, full color. When I just see a game on the shelf and I see the price.
Yeah.
I think for one thing, the one of the first things I look for is the publisher. Like, yeah. I think for me personally, like, knowing who the publisher is or just having that recognition of, have I liked their games before? Like, do they publish the style of game that I typically like? Is one of the things that makes me start valuing it more or valuing it less if I know it's a company that I just haven't really had a great time with. So, like I mentioned in my Molly House review, that I gave Molly House a bit more leeway through its, like, kind of difficult onboarding or its difficult teach, because I know that really good games publish games that I traditionally like so far.
So pedigree matters to you.
Pedigree matters to me in the sense that if I know zero about a game, like I haven't had any hype build up, which will affect value, or if I haven't had any, like, oh, I know exactly what this game is for the most part, or I've read the rule book of this game, but I haven't actually bought it. For me, like, just first thing, do I know the publisher or do I know the designer? Or, like, have I at least heard of them? For me, that's one of the things that I look at for.
Yeah, I wrote a bunch of things down, and all of these, like, come to a globby, squishy amalgamation that becomes, is it worth it? And it's hard to quantify, like, because nothing's on like a scored matrix where if it averages this level, then I automatically purchase the game. But I had pedigree in there kind of as like prestige, like if I know that this is something from someone of note, or it's something that's limited in some way, or something that gives it a certain je ne sais quoi outside of the actual, this is a game that looks cool, I want to play it. Of course, gameplay, like gameplay is the thing. Does this look like a game I'm going to have fun is the first thing that I look at. As far as price range, usually, if anything's within general market price, $40 to $60 for a medium game, that's kind of low these days, but $40 to $60 for a medium game, or getting to like $60 to $80 for like a medium plus or something.
Yeah.
Then I find whatever the price that they set it at is probably fine, because the number of humans that are involved to get games at a retail location. But as far as if it's worth it for me to get it, like that's gameplay. I want to know that there's some cool components in there. We've already had our discussion about good components can't save a bad game, but they can elevate a game for sure. And if I'm paying some cash, I actually want to feel like there's something attractive and interesting about the game. If I was paying $60 for nothing but cards and unattractive illustrations, then I don't know that that's going to be worth it to me. On the other hand, I really like Summoner Wars 2nd Edition, and that has a brilliant art style, and it's mostly cards and a few dice, but I don't have a problem with that being in the same vein as other games that are similar price on the market that have many more plastic or wood components.
Yeah, totally. And I guess for me, the somewhat big elephant in the room is I feel like I don't generally care about how many components. Like I'm not there with like a calculator saying, well, this is 23 dice and therefore it's worth $50. And that's clearly like the tough thing between how publishers value games and how gamers value games. At least I'm pretty sure people aren't out here buying things exclusively based on the number of components or the type of components that have gone into it. At the same time, this is kind of back to one of the games you mentioned earlier. Splendor at $40 for me is like totally worth it, because those chips are just so satisfying for no reason. They did not need to be that like hefty and feel really good. And even if those chips, like that box as a whole, is really cheap to produce, which I actually don't know if it is. I don't know how expensive like weighted poker chips are, because that's essentially what they are. But that's like totally a thing that just playing Splendor once made me immediately go out and buy it. And I would have paid more for it just because of, one, how much fun it is.
Don't say that.
Don't say that.
We already know Asmodee.
Editor, cut that out. Editor, me.
No, I totally get it. I'm not saying that Splendor is particularly cheap to produce, but I think the psychological impact of a small box is an expectation that it would be small box prices. And just like, I think the closest comparison is the book industry, where you have a standard price range for what might be a trade paperback, a mass market paperback, a hardcover, and like a special edition hardcover.
Yeah.
Like those should fall in similar zones, at least within certain markets. Like that's not taking into account educational textbooks or, historical atlases in nonfiction versus what the latest Stormlight book is or whatever. Yeah. But, bringing the comparison to books is something that I find really fascinating about this, is that we don't compensate the design time or development time. And this is something that I talked to John D. Clare about a little bit on the podcast, but also just hanging out with him at Platypus Con here. We talked a lot about, he was like, man, it's funny because like this game that I have spent 10 years working on, far more hours than any other game that I've ever worked on, at least triple the hours that I've spent blood, sweat, and tears and working on, is something that isn't, you know, is a much more difficult pitch for a lot of people. And I'm trying to navigate how to get this game made. Whereas a game that I just kind of was like, all right, this is the game. And it instantly was picked up and is the biggest seller and is what's, currently paying for my house or whatever, there isn't a correlation between the amount of time that someone puts in or even the volume of work. It's really the volume of components. And that's where it gets into the book thing because, aside from really substantial, maybe like epic fantasy books, a book with a standard amount of words versus a book with more words doesn't like translate to any meaningful difference in value. And I don't know if that has an impact on like the psychological value. Certainly when I was in middle school, you wanted to buy the Wheel of Time books because they were fat books and you got more bang for your buck. I got more Nynaeve pulling on her braids. I needed to do that because I needed to kill more time with my books.
You needed those,
and I think that goes
3,000 page books for you.
Yes, exactly. I needed to hear more tuttering going on at Terra Valon. But anyway, that brings us back to splendor and this like perceived value versus actual value. And something that's been more attractive to me in games recently, I don't know if you've had this feeling, but because of our game space issue, having so many games on the shelf, smaller but beefier games, more beautiful games that have a smaller shelf print, I don't know, shelf space. That's been more attractive to me. I'll actually pay a little bit more attention to games like White Castle and Salton Sea by DeVere, which take up a tiny amount of space but feel like big, giant, meaty games and aren't a big waste of space.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a factor that definitely is there for you and me. Probably for a lot of gamers. Like, I can't imagine there's people who there probably are. There's so few spaces for games in, I feel like, a lot of common households. So I think being able to tighten the package up is, it feels like paradoxical, because when we talk about Splendor, people wouldn't pay $50 for Splendor or $40 for Splendor if it was the smaller box. If it was just like the deck of cards size box. And at the same time, you and I think, both value White Castle really highly because of how much game is in that box. And it is just like, I'm thankful that they didn't make it this bigger box to maybe justify it being a bit more expensive, because how much is Splendor or White Castle? Like off the shelf? I don't know.
The MSRP.
What is the MSRP for White Castle?
I'm guessing $49.99.
I'm guessing $60. I'm guessing 60. Oh, that. Do you want to guess what my Google of White Castle MSRP brought up?
How much sliders are at White Castle?
Absolutely.
Love it.
It still hasn't gotten me the answer. Here we are. Oh. MSRP is $40.
Okay, I was actually going to say I bought it at a convention for $40 the year that it came out, but I was thinking that was
A deal.
a deal.
White Castle,
Yeah.
you did even better than I thought.
Yeah, and that's got some nice components in it.
That
You
does.
get a good amount of game for
You
$40.
get, like the little fold, or you have the build your own bridges, build your own
Yep.
Jeff Bridges. But yeah, I
Now
think
that is a game I want to play.
there's probably a Lego set. You could probably get into a Lego set of Jeff Bridges. Is there a Big Lebowski?
Would it be?
Hey, editor, can you put
I was going to say Tron. Yeah.
Big Lebowski Lego? Is there? It is there. There is a Big Lebowski
got
something or other.
Rug, White Russian, rug, sunglasses. That's what I'm going for.
The one that I'm looking up is... Oh, wait,
Bowling
never mind.
ball.
Hold on. I'm looking at just like people have made Lego sets of their things. This isn't an official one. Okay, we're going to get off of the Lego podcast now. I don't know how to navigate Rebrickable. I just know that it exists.
So, okay. So, as far as the things that we value, the things that make us interested in a game, where I went over, is it a type of game that seems interesting to me? I'm also going to be looking at, is this something that I don't already have access to in my collection? Or easy access to that my friends have. There was a point when I had to own every game I liked, and then I realized I can't do that. So now, if my friend already has a game, even if I really like it, unless I believe I'm going to be playing solo a billion times, I'm just going to go well, when my friend, no longer wants it or moves or whatever, then I'll reconsider this. I think manufacturing principles is something that has become more important to me. And I think Deep Regrets is a great example of this. TEDx Games has put a big emphasis on renewable resources used in the manufacturing of it. They use cornstarch bags instead of plastic bags, all wood components or cardboard components. Minimizing the environmental impact. Those things alone won't make me buy a game or sway me in one direction or another. But I do care about these things enough that, that can help me make a decision or kind of guide what I do. Because as we've talked about, more and more, we as human beings are going to have to be conscious about the outcomes of the world are driven by the dollars that we spend and what are the things that we actually want to support. Sometimes those environmental or charitable things that a company can do are hard to suss out the legitimacy of them. But fortunately, in the board game space, because there's such a close connection between us, the consumer, and the people making the games, I find that if you're trying to look for the principles of the people who are making the things that you want to play, if you want to know more about their business practices, about their the validity of their charitable work, if they're involved in all of that, it's much easier to find that, become involved, see the payoff of it. And again, I just opened my copy of Deep Regrets and was like, yeah, this is great. These are the cornstarch bags he was talking about.
Yeah,
it's pretty
cornstarch. I think that the manufacturing principles, those were the terms you used to describe it?
It's on my sticky sheet. Manufacturing principles.
I think that manufacturing principles sound great, and it's definitely a thing that you can get a good feel of before you purchase something, because I feel like most games these days have some sort of unboxing video, so you can get a general idea of what components you're going to be getting. And also, again, with all of these companies, I feel like creating reputations of having those, you can definitely make some purchase decisions based on that, or like value decisions of, this game definitely has like, I trust this game to have been made with at least an ounce of concern over the greater world. And I think that's a very strong argument to make. One thing
to be clear,
go ahead. Yeah.
my moral superiority here is very low, in that I don't go out of my way and research these things in advance. I mean, I understand the death of the author principle, and it's, I think, next to impossible to not think about someone being an asshat if I know about them being one, but I don't research every publisher. I don't research every designer, and I'm well aware that there are some unsavory things that go on in the manufacturing of any of these products. Yeah. So, like, I'm not in the clear on all of this, though what I guess I'm saying is, if I know that someone is already engaged in that stuff, that's going to call my attention to their products more so. So, for example, if TEDx Games comes out with something new, that's one little thing that I've put in the, like, hey, I like some of the things that this company is doing column that will contribute to that glob of value that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. That may help push me over the edge, is the principles, what this company brings to the table, what they prioritize and find important, align with some of the things that I find important.
Yeah, totally. And I think it can be important as a consumer to educate yourself on what's going on, at least generally. Just make sure you know that you're, as much as possible, knowing who you're supporting with your dollar when you vote with your wallet. Speaking of voting with your wallet, one thing that I've definitely done before in terms of like seeing a game on a shelf being like, oh, that looks interesting, let me just take a look. I will go to like Board Game Geek and see how much it would sell for used, and just with the thought of, if I really don't like it, how much money would I really be losing? And one time I made a profit. It was great. I got Marvel Champions at like a random thrift shop, and I was like, oh, they're selling this for like $5. I'm going to try it out because I've wanted to try out Marvel Champions, and I tried it out and realized that it wasn't really for me. I mean, I know like the Arkham Horror living card game is another one that I've tried out that just didn't quite hit for me, even though I know that it's like supposed to be really good soloable, and also multiplayer. But I was like, well, maybe with a new theme, it's a different living card game system, so maybe I'll give it a go, and it didn't work for me. But I was one of the reasons I got it in the first place was I can sell this for like so much more. I think I sold it for like $80.
Wow, that's actually a good chunk.
Profit. Well, because it had a bunch of expansions in it, which I was also surprised that. I'm really surprised that it ended up in a thrift shop. That's been like the only game I've ever been able to sell through Board Game Geek. Was this Marvel Champions living card game set that was just a whole bunch of different things, but it worked. I'll take it. But that's the thing that I've looked at where I'm not thinking about it in terms of I'm going to purchase this game to sell it, but just how much inherent value does this game have? Like with once you drive a car off the lot, it's lost half its value type situation.
So, if we took out resale as an option, if you say there was a game where you're like, that looks like a pretty fun game, but I don't really need it in my collection, costs $80. But then you saw at like a convention, someone had a used copy that they were selling at like a bazaar or something for $40, and you had no intention of selling it, and you passed on it as an $80 game that was like, doesn't really do much for me. Is there an instinct of like, oh, this is an $80 game that I can get for half off. I need to buy this now.
I'll definitely take another look. Like, I don't know. I think that's a thing that happens where if I see something's on sale, I'll be like, let me just take a look. Let me reconfirm what value I would be willing to pay for this. I would say typically if I'm not buying it for the reason that I don't think I need it in my collection, I don't think that there's really a ton of like monetary reasons to sway me to then purchase it later. I'll definitely reconsider. Like, I've definitely gone back and been like, Arkham Horror Living Card Game's on sale. I could give it another go. Maybe I like it. Maybe I just didn't give it enough of a chance. I
gotta get some of those expansions in there.
Get some of those expansions in there.
You just didn't sink enough money in, man.
Maybe there's a big sale on it. I'll take a look. And I usually take a look, and I come to the same conclusion that I unless I didn't purchase the game for financial reasons, it being on sale typically won't make me buy it.
Right.
I've definitely looked at games and there are absolutely games that I've taken a look at, been like, oh, that game looks like a lot of fun, but it's just a bit too expensive for me to be able to say like definitely yes, even if I think that it is at a good price. Like, I'll just give an example. I haven't purchased Oath because I just haven't really ever felt like, I think this game looks really great. I don't know if I should spend $120 on this game.
Right.
And that's, I think, a thing that I still want to do. I do frequently loop back to that because Oath.
Wait for the expansion because it's supposed to have better solo focused material.
Ooh, okay.
You know, like that. There you go.
Well,
you know,
but that's a thing where if I saw Oath on a pretty good discount, I would absolutely purchase Oath. That's right. 100% a thing that would sway me to purchase Oath versus anything else, because for Oath it does go back to, I think that game is a good value at $120. I just fiscally am probably not in a position where I should spend $120 on a game, despite the fact that I would get tons of hours of play out of it, and like the dollar to hour ratio would be good compared to other forms of entertainment. But you know, that's just a consideration with being a gamer. Like, that's a very strong financial commitment to a game.
I think a big part of it is the impulse buy. You know, like if there's a game that I'm like, I don't know, it looks like it might be good, it might not be good, and I don't have access to it, then dumping $100 for something that I may end up going like, this was disappointing, is a big difference from, you know, 20. Like finding on sale for $50 or something like that and being like, oh, okay, well, you know, this wasn't for me, but at least I didn't spend $100 on it. So that's where it's definitely going to sway me. A game that I'm not entirely sure that I like. We, of course, have different motivations. We get to talk about it on podcasts.
Yeah.
We get to do review videos, even in addition to, like, us getting review copies of games. Even something like Aeon's End, or I just got The Last Bastion. Part of this was me going, like, I've done my research. I kind of think that they're going to be for me, but I'm not really sure. And I don't actually have a lot of people who I'm directly connected with who I really know their interests in games. And is this something that I really should just throw a bunch of money into? But at the same time, the games were affordable. You know, Aeon's End wasn't super expensive. The Last Bastion wasn't super expensive. And I wanted to fill gaps in my video game, my tabletop gaming knowledge, so that way I could talk about them, possibly do some reviews on them, have some content to create. So I have other motivations that offset the costs, even if those aren't things that I'm directly looking into.
Yeah, totally. And one thing that we should maybe talk about is you and I do get, because of primarily your hard work, we both get review copies of games on occasion. I would say that is something that I kind of have to factor in, which is a little bit of, I, for one, still want to put money into the board gaming industry. As a person who's like an active participant in the board gaming industry, I would like to put money towards it. I've also had times where I have not purchased a game because I already know that I have games that I should be playing to review. So I've fallen away from impulse buying games. I'm at this point mainly buying games that I just really am like, oh yeah, that game looks great. I don't know if we're going to get a review copy or not. I'm just going to purchase it because I would like this game.
Yeah, it's actually kind of gone the reverse for me recently. Since you've been doing stuff on the channel, that's freed me up to do more exploration outside of mere obligation. For a while, I was very much that way. Not that I was refusing to buy anything, and not that I was, like, refusing to spend money, but just my time was largely focused on games that were being sent to me, so I didn't have a lot of incentive of getting other games unless it was something that was so specifically up my alley that I knew that I wanted to get it. And in that case, it probably was going to be content for the channel.
Yeah.
Now, I have more occasions to be like, you know what? We were talking about Forbidden Jungle. I'm
totally
going to get Forbidden Jungle. I'm going to get Aeon's End, The Last Bastion. I'm going to get these things because we have more time and flexibility to split up projects. I don't feel like every game that I touch has to get a review because we're doing a podcast and can talk about games more often. Like, we have other avenues and flexibility, but I do know kind of where you're at. And for a while, that is definitely where I was. I am appreciative for being in the blessed position of getting a lot of rad as hell games for free to check out. So that way we could talk about them.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that, and we could talk about the economics of being reviewers for a bit, which is just like how much, in theory, how much value does company get by giving us games versus us having to not, or like just not purchasing a game and not doing a review on it. But realistically, we both still are going to have games that we want to play that there's just not really a way to get a review copy of. And I think that
Aeon's End's been out for 10 years. Indie Board and Cards is not like soliciting for reviews right now.
That's so weird.
Like, I guess I could. I guess I could hit them up and be like, hey, you got some expansions. I may even end up doing that, but the initial hey, I had birthday money. It was my birthday recently. I'm in my last year of my 30s, living the dream. Woo. And two, all this tariff stuff has made me go very into supporting local. So I went over to Alaska Robotics here and picked that up. I went to Record Store Day yesterday, picked up some records at Downtown Disc, trying to help these local businesses. But as far as the values that we bring to the table as influencers, content creators, as much as I feel gross saying those things. Just saying it aloud makes me want to say smash that bell, and that's just awful. What I do know is that there's huge value in even small channels like ours, which is a small channel. We're a big fish in the very small channel market. We are a very small fish in the big channel market, even within the board game sphere. But having a review video get 500 views or something, but from an audience that specifically cares about what you have to say, is meaningful and is so much less expensive than putting like a banner ad up somewhere, or having a I guess you don't put advertisements in magazines anymore, but point being,
you might
there's
Senate magazine, there's board game advertisements in Senate, like the amount it takes to do the graphic design for one of those advertisements and pay for it to be posted for hopefully like a hyper specialized audience is more probably than just the cost of the raw materials for a board game. Like in theory, it's
absolutely. I mean, if a board game costs say $80 MSRP, then that publisher probably has that copy at like $18, maybe $20 or something, and so they're just out $20 and some shipping for some dedicated people to talk to people who, let's say, half of that audience expects a level of reputation from them. Like there are people who watch every single Cardboard Herald video, or occasionally watch these videos with a knowledge of who you and I are, thinking, well, like they are one more group that if they say they like a game, that goes into the chink. This is a positive in that big glob of value. And that is such a low investment for a lot of publishers.
But speaking of value, other people's reviews. I think that it's very helpful to just I think a game goes way up my, I will definitely pay that much for that game. If I know a friend of mine who I really, either I know their sense of game mentality, if completely separate from the Cardboard Herald, if you, Jack, my friend, tell me that you like this weird space Euro game, I will look for that game. That's definitely something that reviews from friends, reviews from if there's a content creator that I've followed and generally know their vibes, I will trust. Going back to that adds to I'm not going to purchase a game exclusively because a content creator or a friend likes a game. But if I'm on the fence, that will tip me more towards buying a game than not.
Right.
And that's such an intangible one where...
All of this is intangible. I mean, all of this is subjective. What are we even doing here?
I don't know, Jack. Oh, my chair just broke a little bit.
we both started leaning back, and it just caused problems. Caused problems and caused chaos.
But yeah, I mean, I think that there's just so many different ways to value games. And I hope that with this podcast, we've kind of given some thoughts of what are the bigger things for the two of us. Like, especially for, like, watching a review from me versus watching a review from you. Kind of knowing whether or not what you and I might value in a game and might give it credit for, like ding it for, and also just like, you know,
I think that could be a whole separate discussion of just like what taste is, you know, like what are our absolute preferences, and maybe that really comes down to things like, you know, top 100 games or, you know, top 10 in a category or something. That's where you can elaborate more on why I've arranged these specific games to be this way. And if you watch our reviews, I think we articulate for good reason what we like about a game or what we don't. But, you know, that could be a whole other thing for use case scenarios, for, you know, things that are going to get our attention and everything. But I think at least this podcast, this goes into what things at least initially attract us to a game, and like what are some of the broader categories of things that might get us to investigate a game a little bit further.
Yeah, totally. What's the most valuable game you own?
So if I'm saying emotionally valuable...
I asked this question and don't have an answer, so if you can stall for a bit while I figure that out.
I can vamp, baby. I can vamp. Most emotionally valuable is I have an original copy of Hero Quest, which, back into the Cardboard Herald lore, beep. This is a game that I played with my brother a ton. It was really my exposure into deeper board games and heroic fantasy, and was a really important part of a key time in my life where I was kind of developing into who I was and what my interests were. And so Hero Quest is... well, I guess it's available now in a newer version, so that's cool, but I have a original copy, so that's probably the most emotionally valuable. Monetarily valuable, I would say that, Frosthaven is the heaviest MSRP box that I have, and then collectible value... I have the viticulture wine crate with all the viticulture content in it, and the wine crate is numbered 0001 out of 5,000. So I guess that's pretty cool.
Oh, wow. That is really cool. Neat. Yep. For me, your answers were really good and like really nice emotionally. What I would consider my most valuable game would be this random copy of Ascension I picked up at I think it was at Platypus Con. Because I think I got this for like $5, and I have... my wife loves this game so much. We have gotten, I think, easily 40 hours total of Ascension. And this is just the base set. We haven't even gotten into the expansions. And that doesn't even count the so many hours my wife has put into the app, and that I've put into the app playing with the expansions. That is just this... And also, it came with card sleeves that are Ascension card sleeves, which I think are cool. Nice little... but the... oh, no. I'll have to sort that later. I took a card out of one of the starter decks, and I don't know which starter deck it is. I'm going to have to go in and count cards later. That one, just in terms of dollar amount to fun, is the most valuable. Emotionally valuable is probably... I don't know... Can you see it here? Yeah. That copy of Terraforming Mars is like one of the few games I brought with me from when I moved up to Juneau from Los Angeles. Because Terraforming Mars is like one of the games that I consider like my first heavy into the board game hobby games. Like past Catan, past everything. And that's like the copy that I've carried with me. I think I brought it from Boston to Los Angeles and then Los Angeles to June. Like this has been one of the oldest games that I own in terms of like how long it's been with me. And we still play it frequently. This is still like one of the games we teach people after we've played like Wingspan a few times or something else a few times to like go like, okay, do you like big games? Because we can try one. Terraforming Mars isn't even like that crazy, all things considered. Once you get like, once a person's gotten 4 or 5 rounds in and they start getting it, it's easy. So it's not like it's a very heavy game. I'm not bringing out Dune Imperium or Imperium Horizons on these people that are still new to games.
Okay, that we gotta end this because that's a bananas claim. That I realize you said Imperium Horizons instead, but just it breaks my brain to imagine Dune Imperium being somehow more complex than Terraforming Mars. As
I was looking at Dune Imperium and thinking Imperium Horizons. Dune Imperium is probably not a heavier teach than Terraforming Mars.
It's probably same zone. I tend to think of Terraforming Mars as a little bit crunchier.
A little bit crunchier. And a little bit less
intuitive. A little bit more esoteric.
But yes. I feel like that faux pas is as good as any to end the podcast on. Everybody's going to leave this week's podcast with thinking I have a weird time learning the rules to deck builders.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's the major takeaway of this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions for us about our opinions on how to value games or questions for future podcast topics, if you have one in mind that you really want to get our thoughts on, please comment them on YouTube or Spotify, or you can email them into us at cardboardherald@gmail.com. We'd love to get your thoughts on that. Thank you so much for tuning in and being a great community as always. I'm hoping this was a little bit of a more lighthearted episode compared to last week's.
That's the hope.
The hope is that we didn't like really traumatize somebody with talking about value. Thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, we're over here talking about value of games, and people are like, "Man,
my 401k value has devastated."
Forget that. They're tracking how much it costs to get a box of mac and cheese right now. You know.
Well, thanks for tuning in. I've been Eric with the Cardboard Herald, along here with Jack.
Bye.
Can you do the heart emoji one last time for the fans?
For the fans.
There it is.
Boom. So dumb.